Hello there everyone, and welcome back to Void Dwarf Studios, where we continue looking at the rather spiky witch elves, the Daughters of Khaine. And this time we're going to look at Morathi's chosen warriors, or at least two of them are, shall we say. The third one is more of a inconvenience Morathi has to contend with for the moment, but I'll get into them later. These will be the Harpies, the winged creations of Morathi, the Medusi, or Medusi as they are often known, and the Doomfire Warlocks. Each one of these has a very interesting history and backstory to them, because these aren't quite like your typical witch elves. Whilst the witch elves maintain their humanoid form, these creations are a twisted amalgamation of Morathi's own doing. She wanted to create more loyal followers who linked to her through magic, sorcery, and all that other fancy stuff. It wasn't enough for Morathi to have witch elves to return from the world that was. It was more important for her that she created elves who were twisted in her own image. She wanted devoted followers on a scale that even the witch elves couldn't master, especially if they found out that Khaine, sort of doesn't really exist. Kind of. It's a little confusing right now. But anyway, starting off with the Harpies. The Harpies are a twisted, demon-tainted elf. Or elf, if you're speaking as in the old world. Morathi's blood and her magic is mixed into these elven souls, and it created the monstrosities you see before you. They take on the aspect that Morathi has, that is her winged form, when she is that wonderful big snaky creature. And there's a certain degree of an amusing history to these creatures, because the Dark Elves, as they were in the world that was, had a unit known as Harpies. So I'd like to think that Morathi remembered those creatures from the world that was, and decided to twist these elven souls to suit this form. Whatever magic she wrought, a mixture of blood magic, dark sorcery, and her own twisted malice, these creatures became realized, and were even more loyal to Morathi than even her witch elves, who, let's be fair, are pretty damn loyal, just so long as they never find out about Khaine. Whereas these creatures are almost a part of Morathi's soul. They are linked to her. They worship her for being their creator, more than Khaine. This is one of the reasons why Morathi is more comfortable trusting them with important tasks. Whilst the witch elves go out and form the bulk of the armies, the Sisters of Slaughters alongside them, the Harpies she sends out for more personal missions, such as the Heartrenders. Also known as the Khaine, the Heartrenders fly overhead and throw large barbed javelins into any oncoming forces. Constantly in motion, darting around the battlefield, they will scan it for any signs of a fresh victim. And they have a particular fondness for extracting the hearts from their foes, offering them in service to Khaine and Morathi herself. And the other variation on these creatures are the Life Takers. Winged Harpies, the Life Takers much prefer using their sickle blades and getting stuck into close combat. They will fly down from high above and decapitate and maim any and all creatures in their way. Their heart-piercer shields offering not only protection but an extra weapon, as when you're flying down at speed on an unsuspecting foe, a big spiky bladed shield is bound to sever heads and, well, cause all kinds of problems. The Heartrenders have a very respectable movement of 14 inches, with a bravery of 7 and a 6+ save, so you don't really want to get too stuck in combat for too long, thanks to that unhealthy 6+ save. However, with their barbed javelins at a 12-inch range, hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s, and with 1 rend of the damage, and in melee not as good, but with the ability to hit and wound on 4s with that rend, it will do something at the very least. But it's the fact that they can fly and that you can have them in relatively decent sized units, which means you can avoid some of the bigger problems, such as that terrible armor save. They are equipped with the barbed javelins and heart-piercer shields. The shields giving them a 5+ to their save, and in addition to this, you can do mortal wounds in close combat when you save on a 6, which is pretty handy, and it means that 5+ save is actually good for something, especially if you can roll a 6. So it's always worth trying to make a save. if you get it. But there are far more fun ways to use these lovely ladies than keeping them stuck in combat, such as the Death from Above. When you shoot with this unit, in addition, you can change the rend characteristics of their javelins to 2 if they are shooting on the same turn they were set up. It works in conjunction with their other rule, Descend to Battle, which means you can place these ladies off the table and they can turn up in the movement phase on a turn of your choice, 9 inches away from an enemy model, well within barbed javelin range, and in conjunction with that as well, after this unit has finished making all of its attacks in the shooting phase, you roll a dice, and on a 4+, you can make a 6-inch movement. So, this is a shock and surprise unit. You bring them on the table, you throw your javelins with the extra rend, and then you duck out of the way, giving yourself a comfortable 15-inch distance from your opponent, which for most units is going to be frustratingly out of range. And that's the whole point. These harpies are not meant to be stuck in combat, they're meant to be harassing the foe and causing as much mayhem as they can. Their more close combat variant, who have the exact same main profile, the 14-inch move, 1 wound, 7 bravery and 6 up save, increased to a 5 up thanks to the lovely shields, are instead armed with barbed sickles. These give them 2 attacks, hitting on 3s, winning on 4s and 1 damage, and the following extra ability. You get to add 1 to the damage characteristics of the sickles on the turn in which they charge. They have the same Descend to Battle rule, which means you can set them up in a movement phase, keeping them in reserve until you feel it's the right time, and the Fight or Flight ability, meaning that if you roll a 4+, you can move them 6 inches in any direction you like, with the Fight and Flight rule, which is different to the Heartrenders in that at the end of the combat phase you make a roll, and on a 4+, you move 6 inches. This can be a maddeningly frustrating ability because what you're essentially doing is you appear, you charge, you hack a bit, and then you can just move 6 inches away, which is an annoying prospect at the best of times, and again, in conjunction with your Heartrenders, it just means that you can cause more mayhem on the battlefield. Both variants have their tactical uses, and well, that 14-inch movement is going to be amazing for objective holding if you're playing an objective-based game, and like I said, you can take this unit in big enough quantities that you're going to weather some shooting, just don't expect them to survive too long to any concentrated firepower. You can have this unit of a minimum of 5 to 20 models, so yeah, I would at least try and get them in groups of 10, because they're not going to survive very long. That 5 up save only matters in close combat, and otherwise 6 up save ain't going to help you, especially if you fight something like Caradons, who often have -1 rend weapons. Yeah, that's you're going to die real fast to those fancy handguns. Now that we've looked at 2 very interesting flying elements to your army, let's look at something a bit more on the ground, and takes another aspect from Morathi, the Methuselah. Much like their harpy cousins, the Methuselah are elven souls whom Morathi has corrupted and twisted. They were already slightly tainted by Slaanesh, much like the Harpies were, but Morathi decided to twist them just that little bit further to fit her own image. Hence the snake tails. In the dungeons beneath Haganah, the capital city, these souls were mixed with shadow magic, Morathi's own blood, and reborn as the Methuselah, or Medusi, depending on how you say it. They have an incredible, scornful hatred for Slaanesh, and these creatures are essentially the temple bodyguards. They are the eyes and ears of Morathi. They closely guard her and make sure her goals and objectives are enacted, usually under painful force to anyone who's not up to standard. The Methuselah, more often than not, tend to stay out of sight to anyone who isn't a witch elf, either remaining inside the temples or disguising themselves through illusionary magics that they can use. It is rumoured there are additional forms of Methuselah, but these have not been seen as of yet. And again, because they share their very essence with Morathi and what has happened to her, these creatures are absolutely loyal, beyond a shadow of a doubt. And this is probably why, if the whole Khaine thing goes crumbling down, the Harpies and the Methuselah will stand by her side, regardless of the cost. These temple guards and personal guards form into 2 different units so far, the Blood Sisters and the Blood Stalkers. The Sisters are powerful bodyguards who tend to make sure that the High Priestess, or Blood Rack Methuselah, who we will get to in another video,
are kept safe in their various war covens. Each of them is equipped with what is known as a heart shard glaive, essentially a very heavy polearm, perfect for cutting enemies in half or making a kebab out of them. And each one of these blood sisters can channel the darkness within them to essentially rot the soul that they stab. These are magical weapons without a shadow of a doubt, and very, very dangerous. Even the lightest touch can transform their victim into coiling mists, or just, stab them and they'll bleed massive amounts. Either way, an interesting aspect of the Methuselah is they have incredible heightened senses. Even for elves, this is heightened to the extremes. They love and delight in causing pain on others, and smells, tastes, and touch are far more intricate and exquisite for them. It is a blood sister's favourite pastime to thrust their glaive through someone's body and watch their soul drain out of it. Or, turn them into crystal with a touch. And these statues will remain inside the temple or around the temple as a disturbing garden with all kinds of sculptures along the trail. The Methuselah wear masks to hide their facial features, and this is partly for ceremonial reasons, but also to honour their god, Morathi. Yes, I said god, and that is because the Methuselah, much like the Harpies, worship Morathi herself, and not Khaine. The blood stalkers are elite archers, again, guards for the various commanding elements of the temples. These Heartseeker bows are made from a sentient tree that grows within the realm of shadows, known as an ash dusk. Any arrow loosed by this bow is blessed by the Hag Queens and imbued with enchantments that are similar to those that are weaved into Morathi's spear, meaning that essentially they have homing arrows, so aiming isn't really much of a point with these things. In close combat, these Bloodstalkers do carry a blade known as Sianlar, essentially long curved daggers that are designed to, eviscerate, disembowel, and otherwise make whoever is stupid enough to get too close die a horrible, horrible death. But of course making sure that the hearts are offered in the Temple of Khaine, because that's just all good and proper. And they come with a pet, known as a bloodworm, essentially a kind of draconic creature, but nowhere near as powerful as the black dragons or star drakes. We're talking about a very tiny creature, but it's with its uses. The Blood Sisters, the glaive variants, have an 8-inch movement, 8 bravery, 2 wounds apiece, and a 5+ save. Not half bad at all. And their Heart Shard glaive is a 2-inch weapon with 3 attacks, hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s, -1 rend to their damage. And they have an extra ability called Crystalline Touch, which hits on a 4, but every time you score a hit, the target automatically takes a mortal wound. That's potentially really horrible, especially as these ladies can come in groups of 5 to 20 models, and all those extra mortal wounds are gonna make things uncomfortable. But not much else to say with these ladies. This is essentially the extent of their abilities. But being able to turn creatures into crystalline statues is a very cool, fun thing. And yeah, these are your bruiser units. Your witch elves are your DPS. Your blood sisters are going to just hack, cut and cleave through everything. This is the closest thing you have to a tanky unit, really, for your witch elves, until you get to the avatars of Khaine. But again, we'll cover them in another video. The Bloodstalker variant, the lovely ladies with the bows and the cute little lizard, are a little bit more complex in that they have whilst they have the similar stat profile, the 8-inch movement, 5-up save, 8 bravery and 2 wounds, of course they have those beautiful heart-seeking bows. 24-inch range, which is very respectable in Age of Sigmar, where ranged combat is not really that ranged. You have a single attack, but it hits on a 3, wounds on a 3, and -1 rend. So you'll have some fairly consistent shooting out of these ladies. And in close combat, they are actually almost as scary as the Blood Sisters. The Sacrificial Dagger with 2 attacks, hitting on 3s and wounding on 4s, no rend but 1 damage. And your leader has that lovely little Bloodworm, which has a single attack that hits and wounds on 3s and does a single point of damage. But here's the extra fun bit. The Heart-Seeking Bows. Each time you roll a hit of a 6, in the shooting phase, the target takes a mortal wound. So yeah, mortal wounds coming out of the wazoo with everything that these witch elf units we've been talking about have. There is a reason that these creatures are feared. They're not going to go away anytime soon, especially if you take them in units of 20 with that lovely bravery of 8. And finally, we come to a unit who is not loved by Morathi. In fact, you could arguably say that they are the most downtrodden and unfortunate creatures in the Age of Sigmar universe, and I don't say that lightly. The Doomfire Warlocks. Now, even Morathi wasn't capable of creating a sustainable generation of elves without, well, the old hanky-panky, where elves obviously make new elves. But she did curse every single male elf that she found and made sure that the souls she picked were the ones that were shriveled, disabled, old, decrepit, corrupted, and, well, she just picked the worst male elves she could get her hands on and made them virtually mindless slaves. So, more like breeding stock, shall we say. And any male elf that is born that has any aptitude or potential to become any kind of threat is quietly and subtly removed from society, especially if they're able to wield magic. However, there is an exception, and this is the Doomfire Warlock. These are male elves who, despite all the odds Morathi could stack against them, still grew stronger with time. Most of these elves tended to be born naturally, and a few of them were able to bend the shadows around them to their will, developing an affinity for the darkness and a capacity to absorb mystical energies. And whilst Morathi recognises their potential, she is understandably cautious because, she's not fond of men at the best of times unless they're easily manipulated. And any male elf in her society that has a potential to get smarter, shall we say, she's not on board with. To ensure their faithfulness in this manner, she brands every single one of them and magically controls their actions with said funky brand. Although they are of course told that these markings on them help prevent Slaanesh from eating their souls. Another lovely lie that Morathi has fed to these poor unfortunate gits. And they ride around on shadowy steeds and are able to cast some quite unpleasant and horrific magics on anyone that she deems is an enemy. Although, whilst this is an elevated status that any male elf would never dream to be able to aspire to, this is a hellish existence. With a lovely movement of 14 inches, thanks to their lovely shadowy steeds, 2 wounds, 6 bravery, because, well, they're still not that physically imposing, despite being the best of their breed, and a 5-up save. They are armed with what is known as a Doomfire crossbow, a lovely little pistol-like crossbow with 2 attacks that hit on 4s and wounds on 4s, no rend but 1 damage, and a 10-inch range, which is, it's okay, it's not bad. But really, these creatures excel when you start getting them closer to the enemy, because their close-range attacks are cursed scimitars, blades enchanted with magical energies and able to cut down their targets and make short work of things. Their dark steeds also are quite capable of biting your face off. These are dark elven steeds after all, and are even more bad-tempered than a Shetland pony. 2 attacks, hitting on 4s, wounding on 5s, with 1 damage. And they are of course a wizard, so they get to cast a lovely spell known as Doomfire Bolts. These bolts of blazing black flame envelops the target and, well, burns them from the inside out, making a lovely crispy ash pile wherever you fall. It is cast on a 6, and if successful you can target an enemy unit within 18 inches. The target takes D3 mortal wounds if the unit that's being attacked has 5 models or less, D6 if it's 5 or more, and 6 mortal wounds automatically if it's 10 or more models in the unit. So yeah, this is a very unpleasant ability that these creatures can do, and yeah, it works best when used against larger units. Your Doomfire Warlocks suddenly went from irritating flanking unit to ouch, that really hurt unit. Doomfire Coven ability means they get to add 1 to their ability to cast and unbind spells, if it has 10 models or more still remaining, and they can still cast Arcane Bolt or Mystic Shield as well, meaning that, magically speaking, you have a little bit of flexibility and a pretty nifty little ranged attack. However, because of that 5+ save, I would strongly encourage that you take them in a minimum of 10 or more, because they're not going to survive very long. But if you have your Witch Elves in the middle, your Methuselah and Medusi backing them up, and you have your Heartrenders and Life Takers, as well as your Doomfire Warlocks along the flanks, the flanks are going to fold potentially very quickly, and the middle's going to have a hard time killing off the Methuselah. Even with a 5+ save, their sheer capacity to deal damage is just fan-frickin-tastic. And these are elves. So that wonderful movement that you've got with almost all these units, it means you're going to get across that battlefield awfully fast. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this little episode. I'm going to be a little busy this week due to, work and stuff. Got to make sure I get the money coming in. But if you feel like supporting this channel, please leave a like and subscribe. Consider looking at the Patreon page or check out the Facebook page for future installments so you know what's coming next. Anyway, thank you all again for listening, and I hope to hear from you all soon. Take care, everyone.